I got paid to monitor an empty building. There is a particular kind of job that doesn't get posted on any board you've ever heard of. It doesn't show up on Indeed or LinkedIn, or even the obscure government contractor sites where you can find listings for things like remote site caretaker or environmental monitoring technician. These jobs circulate through a different ecosystem entirely. They pass from person to person in specific circles, through people who have held similar positions and either completed their contracts or didn't, and who know someone looking for steady pay and who can keep their mouth shut. I found mine through a man named Gerald Keene, who I'd worked with briefly on a facilities maintenance crew at a decommissioned VA hospital outside of Scranton, Pennsylvania in 2019. Gerald was quiet, thorough, and had the look of someone who had seen administrative machinery operate in ways that the public never encounters. We stayed in touch loosely after that contract ended. In February of 2023, he called me and asked if I was still looking for work. I was. I'd been picking up short-term maintenance gigs across the Northeast for years. Nothing permanent. I'm the kind of person these jobs attract. No family, no mortgage, comfortable with solitude. Good at following procedures without asking unnecessary questions. Gerald told me he knew of a monitoring position. Long-term contract, decent pay, minimal physical labor. The job was in Latrobe, Pennsylvania, about an hour southeast of Pittsburgh, and it involved a single building on a fenced parcel of land managed by the General Services Administration. The GSA, for people who don't know, is the federal agency that handles government property. They manage buildings, vehicles, supplies. It's the most mundane agency in the entire federal apparatus. Nobody thinks about the GSA. That's part of why this works. Gerald said the building was a former federal office annex that had been decommissioned in 2011 and was technically slated for disposal, which in GSA language means it was supposed to be sold off, demolished, or transferred to another agency. But it hadn't been disposed of. It had been sitting on the GSA's inventory for over a decade, maintained at a baseline level, and the monitoring position had been continuously filled for that entire period. He said the job was straightforward. You live on-site in a trailer provided on the property. You check the building's exterior twice daily, morning and evening. You monitor a set of instruments inside the building and log their readings every 4 hours. You do not enter the building outside of your scheduled monitoring rounds. You report to a project coordinator by phone once a week. You do not discuss the position with anyone. The pay was $5,200 a month, deposited directly tax-handled through a contracting company registered in Arlington, Virginia. No benefits, but for a single man with low expenses living rent-free in a provided trailer, it was more than enough. Gerald told me one other thing before he gave me the coordinator's number. He said the previous monitor had left after 9 months and that Gerald didn't know why. He said the man had simply not renewed his contract and had moved to New Mexico. Gerald said this in the same flat tone he used for everything, and I didn't read anything into it at the time. I called the coordinator. Her name was Ms. Voss. First name never given, never asked for. She was professional, efficient, and communicated exclusively by phone. Never email, never text, never written correspondence of any kind. She asked me a series of questions that were less like an interview and more like a screening. Had I ever held a security clearance? No, but I'd worked on federal properties. Did I have a history of sleep disorders? No. Did I have any condition that required regular medical attention? No. Was I comfortable with extended isolation? Yes. She asked if Gerald had explained the basics of the position. I said he had. She said she would send the contract to a P.O. box that I should set up in my name. She said I should read it carefully and that if I signed it, I should be prepared to start within 2 weeks. The contract arrived 5 days later. It was 11 pages. Most of it was standard independent contractor language, liability waivers, non-disclosure provisions, termination clauses. But there were 3 sections that were unusual. The first stated that I was not to bring recording devices onto the property. No cameras, no audio recorders, no phones with camera capability. I would be provided a basic phone for communication with Ms. Voss and emergency services only. The second section described the monitoring protocol in precise detail. I was to enter the building through the east service entrance using a key provided to me. I was to proceed directly to the monitoring station on the 2nd floor. a room designated as Suite 214. I was to read the instruments, record the readings on paper log sheets provided, and exit the building by the same route. Total time inside the building was not to exceed 20 minutes per visit. The third section was a single paragraph that I read 3 times. It stated that the building may occasionally produce sounds, temperature variations, or other sensory phenomena as a result of its mechanical and structural systems, and that these were consistent with the expected behavior of a decommissioned structure and did not represent a safety concern. It stated that I was not to investigate the source of any sounds or phenomena outside the scope of my monitoring duties. It stated that I was to document anything unusual in my log and report it during my weekly call. That paragraph was written the way legal language is always written, in a way designed to be both comprehensive and vague at the same time, covering everything while explaining nothing. I signed the contract. I drove to Latrobe. The property was on the southern edge of town, set back from a county road behind a chain-link fence with green privacy slats woven through it. The fence was topped with 3 strands of barbed wire. The gate had a keypad lock. Ms. Voss gave me the code over the phone. The parcel was maybe 4 acres, mostly flat, mowed grass, with a gravel access road leading to a small parking area. The trailer was at the far end of the parking area. It was a single-wide, older but clean, furnished simply. Bed, desk, kitchenette, bathroom. Functional. The kind of space where you could live without comfort but without complaint. The building was a 3-story concrete structure with a flat roof and narrow horizontal windows. It looked like every small federal office building built in the 1970s. Brown concrete panels, aluminum window frames. A covered entrance on the east side with double glass doors that had been painted over from the inside with white paint. It could have been a Social Security field office or a Bureau of Land Management outpost, or any one of 10,000 identical buildings that the federal government scattered across the country in the decades after the war when they were building infrastructure faster than they could figure out what to put inside it. The building looked dead. That's the word I would use. Not abandoned, not neglected, but dead. Like it had been operational once and something in it had stopped, and what was left was a shell. The grass around it was mowed, the concrete was clean, the windows were intact, the parking lot was swept. Someone or some system was maintaining the exterior at a level that suggested the building still mattered to somebody, even though it had supposedly been decommissioned 12 years earlier. I started my shifts. The routine was simple. Wake up at 6, walk the building perimeter, check the fencing, check the exterior for any signs of intrusion, damage, or change, log everything, then enter through the east service entrance, climb the stairs to the 2nd floor, walk to Suite 214, read the instruments, log the readings, and exit. Repeat in the evening at 6. Instrument check every 4 hours from 6 in the morning to 10 at night. The instruments were in Suite 214, which had been set up as a monitoring station. The room contained a metal desk, a chair, and 4 instruments mounted on a steel rack against the wall. One was a seismograph. Not a full research-grade unit, but a portable seismic monitor, the kind used for construction vibration monitoring. It recorded ground movement on a paper drum. One was a thermometer array with probes that ran through the wall and, presumably, into other parts of the building. It displayed temperatures for 8 zones on a digital readout panel. One was a barometric pressure gauge, and one was an instrument I didn't recognize. It had no manufacturer label, no model number. It was a metal box about the size of a car battery with a single analog dial on the front, numbered from 0 to 100, and a needle that sat at rest around 6 or 7. I didn't know what it measured. My log sheets had a column for it, labeled only as Gauge D. I recorded the number wherever the needle pointed and did not ask what it meant. For the first 3 weeks, everything was normal. I don't mean that loosely. I mean that every reading was within the narrow ranges that I quickly came to recognize as baseline. The seismograph showed no activity beyond the faint background vibration that you would expect from a building sitting on soil near a road. The temperature zones held steady, most of them around 58 to 62 degrees, which was consistent with an unheated concrete structure in early March. The barometric pressure tracked with the weather. Gauge D sat between 5 and 8. The building was quiet. I did my rounds. I walked the halls to get to Suite 214 and walked them back. The hallways were empty, fluorescent lights in the ceiling, some working, most not. Commercial carpet, gray, the kind you see in every government building in the country. Office doors on both sides, all closed, all locked. I did not open them. My protocol was to go to Suite 214 and back, and that's what I did. But I'll describe the building because the layout matters. The east service entrance opened into a ground floor corridor that ran the length of the building, stairwells at each end. I took the east stairwell up to the second floor. The second floor corridor was identical to the first. Suite 214 was about 2/3 of the way down on the left. The walk from the stairwell door to Suite 214 took about 45 seconds at a normal pace. I passed roughly 20 doors on the way, 10 on each side. Every door was closed, every one identical, with small plastic placards showing room numbers. Suite 201, 202, 203, and so on. The corridor was lit by overhead fluorescents, about half of them working, creating a pattern of lit and dim sections. The carpet was clean, the air was still. There was a smell that I noticed on my first day, and that never changed. It wasn't unpleasant. It was neutral and slightly sweet, like the smell of old adhesive or dried paste. The kind of smell you encounter in buildings that have been sealed for a long time, where the materials have slowly been outgassing into air that has nowhere to go. Week 4 is when the readings changed. It was a Tuesday morning, the second check of the day, the 10 o'clock round. I walked into Suite 214, sat down at the desk, and started recording. The seismograph was baseline. The barometric pressure was normal. The temperature zones were normal across 7 of the 8 probes. Zone 4 was reading 71 degrees. Everything else was in the 58 to 62 range. Zone 4 was 9 degrees warmer than its usual reading. I noted it in the log. I checked the probe label on the rack. Zone 4 was labeled B1-C, which I took to mean basement level 1, section C. I had not been to the basement. My protocol did not include the basement. The building had a basement, accessible by a stairwell at the west end of the ground floor. The door to the basement stairwell was closed, and I assumed, locked like every other door in the building. I recorded the reading and continued my shift. At the 2 o'clock check, Zone 4 was reading 74 degrees. At the 6 o'clock check, it was 76. I noted the progression in my log. Everything else was normal. Gauge D was at 9, which was slightly above its usual range, but not dramatically. I mentioned the Zone 4 readings during my weekly call with Ms. Voss. She was quiet for a moment. Then she asked me to confirm the reading and the rate of increase. I did. She told me to continue monitoring and to note the time of each reading precisely. She did not express concern. She did not explain what might cause a temperature increase in the basement of a decommissioned building with no active heating system. She told me to continue following my protocol and said she would check in again later in the week. Over the following 4 days, Zone 4 climbed steadily. By Saturday morning, it was reading 89 degrees. The other 7 zones had not changed. The building was 59 degrees everywhere except somewhere in the basement, where something was generating heat at an increasing rate. I want to note something here. An empty building does not produce heat. Concrete does not warm itself. An unoccupied, unheated, mechanically dormant structure that has been decommissioned for over a decade does not develop a localized temperature anomaly that increases by 2 degrees a day. I am not a scientist, but I spent years working in facilities maintenance. I know what causes temperature changes in buildings: mechanical systems, electrical faults, solar gain, occupancy, equipment. This building had none of those things. It was empty. Ms. Voss called me on Saturday evening, outside of our normal schedule. She asked me for the current Zone 4 reading. I told her 91 degrees. She asked me to describe anything else I'd noticed during my rounds. I told her the building seemed the same. The hallways were unchanged. I hadn't heard anything unusual. She asked me to be more specific. She asked about the air in the hallways. I thought about it. I told her that on my last 2 rounds, I had noticed that the air in the second floor corridor felt slightly different when I passed the midpoint of the hallway, around the area where suites 210 through 215 were located. It was warmer, I said. Not dramatically, just noticeably. like walking through a pocket of air that was a few degrees above the rest. She asked me if I had noticed anything else. I said no. She told me that a technician would be visiting the site on Monday to inspect the basement. She told me to continue my protocol and not to enter the basement under any circumstances. She said this last part with a slight shift in her tone that I hadn't heard before. Not urgency, not concern, something more like precision, the way someone speaks when they are choosing each word carefully because the exact phrasing matters. The technician arrived on Monday morning in an unmarked white van. He was a man in his 50s, slim build, gray hair, wearing plain work clothes and carrying two hard-sided cases. He didn't give me his name. He showed me an ID badge that said GSA and a project number and nothing else. He asked me to show him the basement access. I walked him to the west stairwell on the ground floor. The door to the basement stairs was indeed locked. He had a key. He opened it and looked down the stairwell and stood there for about 10 seconds without moving. Then he asked me to return to my trailer and wait. He said he would come find me when he was finished. I went back to the trailer. I sat at the desk by the window, which faced the building's east side. I couldn't see the entrance the technician had used, but I could see the building. I waited. He was inside for just over 3 hours. When he came out, he looked the same as when he went in. He walked to his van, loaded his cases, and then came to the trailer. He knocked and I let him in. He sat down at the small table in the kitchenette area and folded his hands. He had a calm, practiced demeanor, the kind that comes from years of assessing situations that other people find distressing. He told me the basement was divided into 4 sections. Sections A, B, and D were standard. Empty rooms, old storage shelving, mechanical spaces with disconnected equipment. Section C was different. He said the floor in Section C was warm, not the air, the floor. The concrete slab, which he estimated at roughly 6 inches thick, was radiating heat upward. He had measured the surface temperature at 94 degrees. He said the heat was not coming from any mechanical source in the building. It was coming from below the slab, from the soil or whatever was beneath it. He said there was no rational mechanical explanation for this. He said he had placed additional temperature sensors in a ground-penetrating radar unit that would take continuous readings and transmit them to a remote monitoring system. He told me my protocol was being updated. I was no longer to enter the building after 8 p.m. My evening exterior check would be moved to 5 p.m., and all instrument checks after 6 p.m. were suspended. I was to remain in my trailer from 8 p.m. until 6 a.m., and I was not to approach the building during those hours. I asked him why. He looked at me with an expression that I've come to recognize over the years since. It's the expression of someone deciding how much truth a person needs in order to comply without knowing enough to become a problem. He said the nighttime protocol change was precautionary. He said the building's thermal profile changed at night, and they wanted to study it without human presence as a variable. I asked him what was under the slab. He said that the building was constructed in 1974 on a site that had previously been used by the Army Corps of Engineers for a project that he described only as subsurface materials research. He said the project had concluded in 1971, and the site was certified as remediated before the building was constructed. He said there were injection wells beneath the building that had been sealed. He said nothing else about it. He packed up and left. I watched his van pull through the gate and turn onto the county road and disappear. I went inside the building for my 2 o'clock round. Everything was the same except the air. The warm pocket in the second-floor corridor had expanded. It was no longer limited to the area around suites 210 to 215. It now extended from the stairwell door to about 10 feet past suite 214. Nearly half the corridor was warmer than it should have been. I recorded the instrument readings. Zone 4 was at 96 degrees. Gauge D was at 14. I wrote the numbers down and looked at the gauge for a long time. The needle was steady. It wasn't fluctuating. It was sitting at 14 the way it had sat at 6 for weeks. Whatever gauge D measured, there was now more of it. What I haven't described yet is the sound. I need to be careful here because I want to be precise. For the first month, the building was quiet in the way that empty buildings are quiet, not silent. There was the hum of the few remaining fluorescent fixtures, the occasional tick of the structure cooling or warming, the distant sound of traffic from the county road. These sounds were normal. They formed a baseline that my ears calibrated to within the first few days, the way your ears calibrate to any consistent environment. In the fifth week, the baseline changed. It was not a new sound. It was an alteration of the existing silence, a quality that entered the quiet spaces between the sounds I was accustomed to. The closest I can describe it is a low pressure. Not a hum, not a vibration, not a tone. A pressure that I felt in my ears and in my jaw. The kind of subaudible sensation you get when a large ventilation system kicks on somewhere in a building and you don't hear it so much as you feel the air change around you. Except there was no ventilation system. There was no air handling equipment operational anywhere in the building. The air in that building had not been mechanically moved in over a decade. The pressure was faint at first. I noticed it only during my monitoring rounds, and only when I was standing still in the corridor near Suite 214. If I was walking, I couldn't feel it. But when I stopped, when I stood in the hallway and held my breath and listened, it was there. A low, steady presence at the bottom edge of hearing. Like the building itself was exhaling very slowly through a passage too deep to identify. I documented it in my log. I described it as accurately as I could. During my next call with Ms. Voss, I mentioned it. She asked me when I first noticed it. I told her. She asked me if it was constant or intermittent. I told her it seemed constant during my rounds, but I couldn't hear it from outside or from my trailer. She asked me if the sensation was stronger in any particular location. I told her it seemed strongest near the midpoint of the second floor corridor, the same area where the warm air pocket had first appeared. She was quiet for several seconds. Then she said something that I wrote down immediately after the call because I wanted to get the words right. She said, "The building may be entering an active phase. Continue your protocol. Do not deviate. Do not investigate. Log everything. If the sensation becomes uncomfortable, leave the building and call me immediately." Active phase. That was the term she used. I did not ask her to define it. I had the sense that if I asked too many questions, the answers would change the nature of my relationship with this job in ways that I could not undo. The following 2 weeks were a slow, steady intensification. The warm zone on the second floor expanded until the entire corridor was noticeably warmer than the ground floor. Zone 4 readings climbed past 100, then 105, then 110. The other zones began to shift. Zone 3, labeled B1-B, rose from 60 to 68. Zone 6, labeled 2F-M, which I now understood meant second floor middle section, rose from 61 to 73. The building was warming from the basement up, and the warmth was concentrated in the center of the structure. The sub-audible pressure grew. I could feel it now from the moment I entered the building. Not just in the corridor, but in the stairwell, on the ground floor. It was like stepping inside a body. The air was warmer than outside. The atmosphere had a weight to it that hadn't been there before. And underneath everything was that low, constant pressure. That sense of slow respiration happening somewhere I couldn't see. Gauge D was at 23. I started to notice the smell. It was the same adhesive paste smell that had been present since my first day. But it had shifted. It was stronger, and there was something underneath it. The way a single note can sit beneath a chord and change its quality without being individually identifiable. The smell underneath was organic. Not decay, not rot, not any kind of decomposition. It was warm and alive and faintly metallic, like blood that hasn't been exposed to air, like the inside of a wound before it opens. I noticed it most strongly in the second floor corridor and in the east stairwell. It was absent on the ground floor, which I found strange because the basement, where the heat was originating, was below the ground floor. Whatever was producing the smell was not rising uniformly through the structure. It was reaching certain areas and not others, as if it were following pathways inside the walls and ceilings, ductwork or conduit channels, or the spaces between the concrete panels where the building's original systems had been routed. On a Thursday in the 6th week, I entered the building for my 10 o'clock round and found that the door to Suite 208 was open. Every door in the building had been closed since my first day. I had walked past them twice a day, sometimes 4 times a day, for 6 weeks. They were always closed. Suite 208 was on the left side of the second floor corridor, 6 doors before Suite 214. The door was open about 4 inches, not swung wide, not ajar. Open exactly enough to see that there was darkness on the other side. I stopped in the corridor and looked at it. The building was quiet. The sub-audible pressure was there, steady, but there was no sound that could have caused the door to open. No air movement, no vibration that I could feel through my feet. I looked at the door for a long time. My protocol was clear. I was to go to Suite 214 and back. I was not to investigate anomalies. I was to document them and report. I documented the open door in my log. I walked past it to Suite 214. I did not look inside as I passed. I recorded my readings. Zone 4 was at 112. Gauge D was at 27. I walked back down the corridor toward the stairwell. The door to Suite 208 was closed. I stopped. I looked at it. It was closed flush in its frame, exactly the way every other door in the corridor was closed. I had not heard it close. I had been in Suite 214 for less than 10 minutes. The corridor was 30 feet of unobstructed carpet between Suite 214 and Suite 208, and I had neither heard nor felt a door close in that time. I stood in the corridor and I considered the explanations. Air pressure differential, thermal expansion of the frame, some mechanical settling of the building causing the latch to engage. All plausible, all ordinary. None of them accounted for the door opening in the first place. A door does not open by 4 inches due to thermal expansion and then close itself 10 minutes later. That requires force in 2 directions. Something opened the door and then something closed it. I looked at the row of identical doors stretching down the corridor in both directions. All closed, all identical. The fluorescent lights hummed and flickered in their usual pattern. The warm air sat around me like a hell breath. I left the building. I went to my trailer and sat at the desk and wrote up the incident. I called Ms. Voss. She answered on the second ring, which was unusual. She normally let it ring 4 or 5 times. I told her about Suite 208. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked me to describe the door's position precisely. I said it had been open approximately 4 inches when I passed it heading toward Suite 214, and it was closed when I returned approximately 10 minutes later. She asked me if I was certain it was Suite 208 and not an adjacent room. I was certain. She asked if I had noticed any change in the sub-audible pressure or the temperature during the event. I thought about it. I told her that I hadn't noticed a change, but I also hadn't been paying attention to those factors at the moment because I had been focused on the door. She said she was going to send another technician. She said that until the technician arrived, I should continue my protocol, but add a new step. Before entering the building for each round, I was to stand at the east service entrance and listen for 60 seconds. If I heard anything from inside the building that I could not attribute to the building's known ambient sounds, I was not to enter. I was to return to my trailer and log the time and call her. The technician came 3 days later. Different person. A woman this time, younger than the first, maybe late 30s, with short dark hair and an expression of focused neutrality that I had started to associate with people who worked in the system. She carried a single equipment case and a laptop. She spent 4 hours in the building. I do not know where in the building she went. When she was finished, she came to the trailer and sat down across from me and opened the laptop on the table between us. She did not show me the screen. She asked me questions for about 45 minutes. When did I first notice the temperature change? When did the sub-audible pressure begin? Had I noticed any changes to the physical surfaces inside the building? Discoloration, moisture, deformation? Had I noticed changes in the smell, and could I describe them? Had I experienced any physical symptoms since the changes began? Headaches, nausea, sleep disruption, unusual dreams? That last question caught me. Not because I had been experiencing unusual dreams, but because of the specificity of it. She didn't ask a general question about my well-being. She asked about dreams as a distinct category, the way a doctor asks about a specific symptom when they already have a diagnosis in mind. I told her no. I told her I had been sleeping normally. She looked at me for a moment, and I had the sense that she was assessing whether I was telling the truth or whether I was the kind of person who would minimize symptoms to avoid being pulled off a job. I was telling the truth. At that point, I had not had any unusual dreams. Before she left, she told me 2 things. The first was that the ground-penetrating radar data from the basement showed that the subsurface material beneath the building's foundation was changing. She described it as increased density at a depth of approximately 40 feet, with a thermal signature that was inconsistent with any known geological or chemical process. The second thing she told me was that the building had been monitored continuously since 2012, and that in 11 years, it had never entered an active phase. She said the instruments had been placed as a precaution based on historical data from the site's previous use. She said the expectation had been that the subsurface material was inert. She said that expectation was being revised. After she left, I sat in the trailer for a long time. I looked at the building through the window. It sat in the late afternoon light, brown and concrete and utterly mundane. And I thought about what she had said: increased density at 40 feet. Thermal signature inconsistent with any known process. I thought about the injection wells that the first technician had mentioned, sealed in 1971. I thought about whatever the Army Corps of Engineers had put into the ground beneath this site 52 years ago, and I thought about the word inert and how confident someone must have been in 1974 to build an office building on top of it. The dream started 3 days later. I want to be precise about this because the technician asked about dreams specifically, which means they expected them, which means they have seen this before. The first dream was not frightening. That's what made it notable. I have had nightmares in my life, the normal kind that everyone has, and they feel like nightmares. Distorted, emotional, illogical. This dream was not like that. I was standing in the second-floor corridor. It was exactly as it appeared during my monitoring rounds. Every detail correct. The pattern of working and burned-out fluorescence, the gray carpet, the closed doors, the warm air. The sub-audible pressure was present. The dream was real in a way that dreams typically are not. I could feel the carpet under my boots. I could smell the warm, organic smell. I was standing near Suite 210, and I was looking down the corridor toward the west end, toward the stairwell that led to the basement. In the dream, the corridor was longer than it should have been. Not impossibly long, not stretching into infinity the way a hallway does in a fever dream. Just longer, maybe 50 feet longer than its actual length, enough that the far end was dimmer than it should have been. The fluorescence there casting less light, the corridor tapering into a grayness that wasn't darkness but was no longer fully lit. At the far end near the floor, something was different. The carpet was darker, a patch of it spreading from the left wall across the floor toward the right, dark and wet-looking, like a stain advancing slowly from underneath one of the office doors. The stain was warm. I knew this the way you know things in dreams, without touching it, without testing it. The stain was warm, and the warmth was spreading toward me, following the carpet the way water follows a slope, and underneath it, beneath the floor, deep below the building, something was awake, not waking up, already awake, already aware. Aware of the building above it and the man standing in the corridor and the pattern of his footsteps that he had repeated twice a day for 6 weeks. Aware of him the way soil is aware of rain. Not thinking about it, just receiving it. I woke up at 4 a.m. The trailer was cold. Outside, the building was a dark shape against a sky that wasn't quite dark enough to hide it. I lay in bed and I thought about the dream, and I recognized something in it that disturbed me more than the content itself. The dream had not felt like my dream. It had not felt generated by my own mind, by my own fears, by the pattern matching and emotional processing that produces normal dreaming. It had felt received, like a broadcast, like information arriving from somewhere outside me and assembling itself into imagery that my sleeping brain could process. I documented the dream in my log. During my morning round, I entered the building and walked the corridor. Everything was normal. The warm air, the pressure, the smell. Suite 208 was closed. All doors were closed. I did my readings. Zone 4 had hit 118. Gauge D was at 31. I walked back through the corridor and left the building. On my way out, passing through the ground floor, I stopped. I turned and looked down the ground floor corridor toward the west end. The door to the basement stairwell was there. At the far end, the same locked door the first technician had opened with his key. It was closed. But standing in the ground floor corridor for the first time in 6 weeks, I could feel the heat coming from it. Not just the sub-audible pressure, not just the altered air quality, but actual physical heat. A warmth radiating from the west end of the building, from the direction of that basement door, reaching me 60 feet away. The second dream came 2 nights later. Same corridor, same fidelity, same sense of being there in a way that was more than dreaming. The stain on the carpet was larger. It covered most of the floor at the far end of the corridor, dark and wet, and the warmth radiating from it was stronger. The doors near the stain, the ones at the west end, were not fully closed. They were open by an inch or two, each of them a row of slightly open doors like a row of barely parted lips. Beyond the doors, in the rooms, something was present, not visible, not making sound, but present the way a person is present on the other side of a wall, detectable through some channel that isn't sight or sound, but that the body registers anyway. And I understood in the dream that the building was not empty. It had not been empty for a very long time. Something had grown up through the foundation and into the walls and the floors and the infrastructure the way the first technician had described tree roots growing through concrete, and it had been there since before I arrived, since before my predecessor arrived, since before the monitoring station was set up. The building was not being monitored because something might happen. The building was being monitored because something had already happened years ago, slowly, and what they were tracking was not an event, but a process. I woke up. It was 3:17 a.m. I was standing at the window of the trailer, looking at the building. I was not in bed. I had gotten up in my sleep and walked to the window. My hand was pressed flat against the glass. The glass was warm. The window faces east. The building is to the west of the trailer. The glass should not have been warm. I pulled my hand away and stood in the dark and felt my heart beat, which was slow and steady, which surprised me because I expected it to be racing. I called Ms. Voss the next morning. I told her about the dreams. I told her about the sleepwalking. I told her about the warm glass. She listened to all of it. When I finished, she asked me one question. She asked me how I felt about the building. I didn't understand the question. She clarified. She asked me if my feelings toward the building had changed since the active phase began. She asked me if I felt drawn to it, curious about it, protective of it, connected to it in any way that I hadn't felt during the first month. I thought about the question honestly. I wanted to say no. I wanted to say that the building was a concrete box that I walked through twice a day and that I had no feelings about it whatsoever. But that wasn't true. The truth was that over the past 2 weeks, as the warmth and the pressure and the smell had intensified, something in my attitude toward the building had shifted. I had begun to think of it not as a structure, but as a presence. Not an intelligence, not a personality, but a presence, the way you think of a large animal sleeping in a room. You are aware of it. You adjust your behavior around it. You don't turn your back on it. You don't make sudden movements. You develop a relationship with it that is not quite caution and not quite respect, but something in between that doesn't have a name. I told Ms. Voss that yes, something had changed. She told me that a relocation team would arrive within 48 hours and that my contract was being terminated early with full pay through the original end date. She told me not to enter the building again. She told me that if I felt the urge to go to the building, especially at night, I should leave the property immediately and drive to a hotel in Latrobe and call her from there. She said this without alarm, the same measured precision as always, but I could hear the edge in it, the careful weight on the word urge in, as if it were a clinical term with a specific definition that I didn't yet understand. I stayed in the trailer for the rest of that day. I did not do my afternoon round. I did not check the instruments. I sat at the desk and I watched the building through the window, and I tried to identify what I was feeling. It was not fear. That's what I want to be honest about. If it had been fear, I would have left immediately. I've felt fear before. This